Welcome back to this meeting of the Net Zero Energy and Transport Committee. We have had quite a long session already on the climate change plan. I'm sure the Cabinet Secretary is looking forward to this session on the budget. So I'll start off, Cabinet Secretary, with the easy question. Of course you'd like to make some opening remarks. No doubt they'll be short, like my question was going to be, Cabinet Secretary. Over to you. Sorry, I'm sorry for cutting you off.
That's right, and I will be very brief, Convener. Thanks for the invitation to give evidence on the 2026-27 transport portfolio budget. So in 2026 to 27, we will make a record investment of £2.7 billion in public transport to fund bus and rail services, concessionary travel for more than 2.4 million people, lifeline ferry and air services, and our investment will support new ferries, port upgrades and the replacement of ScotRail's intercity fleet. We'll continue to make public transport more affordable and accessible, building on the success of free bus travel for under-22s. We're piloting a bus fare cap across the majority of the Highlands and Islands, and we've removed ScotRail peak fares for good, saving passengers 17% on average. So we intend to remove peak fares for islanders using North Isles ferry services, making travel more affordable, and these measures support household budgets, encouraging greater use of public transport and contribute to our wider goals of protecting our climate. In 2026-27, we will invest £1.2 billion to maintain and improve the trunk road network. We will progress major projects, invest in the maintenance of the trunk road network, and enhance road safety to reduce injuries and fatalities. Our infrastructure delivery pipeline reconfirms our commitment to completing the A9 dualling programme by 2035, using capital-funded contracts to secure better value for money. We'll also remain in support of full dualling of the A96, and our investment in the trunk road network over the next 4 years will allow us to make further progress on dualling the A96 between Inverness and Nairn, including the Nairn bypass, along with the adjacent A96, A9, A96 inches to Smithton Link Road. And on tackling climate change, which we've just discussed, that remains central to our work. And as I set out in my earlier statement, across the spending review period, we're investing in decarbonising travel with £1.4 billion in low carbon and sustainable travel. And we're making a further £4.4 billion capital investment in rail fleet and infrastructure over 4 years. And this will support electrification of key routes in the Borders and Fife and facilitate ScotRail replacing intercity and suburban fleets. And our spending plans will help deliver that sustainable, inclusive and accessible transport system that supports Scotland's economies and communities while reducing emissions and adapting to climate impacts. And they align resources to priorities, protecting frontline services that are critical to the running of the transport network. So I welcome the opportunity to discuss our plans and to take members' questions.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary, and I apologise for not bringing you in straight away, but my lack of manners knows no bounds. I should have also welcomed from Transport Scotland Alison Irvine, the Chief Executive, Catherine Jess Gibson, the Director of Finance and Corporate Services, and of course Lawrence Shackman, Director of Infrastructure. So forgive me for not welcoming you to the committee. Now I get to my question. The Scottish Government Cabinet Secretary is investing nearly £500 million in concessionary fares during the period 26-27. That's £55 million more than this year. What evidence do you have that this is the most cost-effective way of delivering transport goals and getting more people to use public transport and therefore reduce carbon output?
So there are a number of different reasons why we have a concessionary scheme. The concessionary scheme was started back in, I think that would be the 2001 legislation that Sarah Boyack took through, from what I can remember at that time. Obviously, we've expanded it since, and that's 2.4 million people using it. So part of that was to help support particular groups that have challenges in terms of costs, and also, I think anybody who knows anybody particularly who is older that's using the concessionary travel, it's that ability to get out and about, to use public services, have the stimulation they need, all the rest of it. And I think it's important in tackling that aspect as well. But your key point is, strategically, does it help us to provide modal shift? So part of that is modelling, where people are using buses. Clearly, Bus use will be determined by a number of things, availability of buses quite clearly. We are in a deregulated market, so the Scottish Government doesn't control where the buses are, etc. But we can provide support and have done through the Network Support Grant, initially there to help buses at the time of COVID, but subsequently seen as important to ensure that they can obviously keep bus routes open where they can and support the industry. But in terms of monitoring, therefore, we've had different experiences post-COVID on return to bus. We had a real challenge with particularly older people, so I might bring colleagues in on how we monitor these things, but the transport use surveys that take place and also our monitoring of the concessionary travel showed that particularly older people were slower to come back. Now, that might be for lots of understandable reasons, people feeling, after the COVID experience that they didn't want to be in closed spaces with other people, etc. There's probably a sociological aspect of that. The good news is actually older people are now coming back. It's a demand-led budget, so obviously the cost of it is led by demand. The more people that use it, or the more people who return back to bus, particularly for older people, and the increasing use by younger people affects the funding that's available to it. But I think it's quite complex to understand, does it in and of itself help the modal shift? And I don't think there's a single answer to that, but Alison, perhaps you might want to give perspective on the bus system.
So just a couple of things to add to what the Cabinet Secretary said around monitoring and evaluation and determining whether these concessionary travel schemes provide value for money. So we do that work. I think if you were to look at our website, you would see that we publish the monthly usage figures for each of the schemes. That is part of our monitoring process, but we also do a periodic evaluation of both the older and disabled persons scheme and the younger persons schemes. I can't quite remember when the next ones of those are due to take place, but they are undertaken because obviously this is quite a significant amount of investment, and therefore it's beholden on us to be able to demonstrate that this does continue to deliver value for money for the taxpayers. I think we also want to be, and we are in continual dialogue with the bus operators, just to ensure that the rate of payment that is made is fair and appropriate, i.e. no better, no worse off. I'm sure that you will hear from, in fact I think you have heard from Mr Fairley in respect to the kind of the returns that come on that. So quite a complex web of evaluation, monitoring, etc. that goes on across the whole concessionary travel scheme.
Okay, so I probably ought to declare I'm in that older group when it comes to concessionary travel. But my point is that when I first started off in this Parliament, 2016, I seem to remember a order coming through on concessionary travel, which was about 193 million off the top of my head, give or take a million. It was around that figure. We're now up to nearly 500 million. And we've seen bus travel journeys, the number of bus journeys going down. So it's not really achieving what it's setting out to do, is it? Doing modal shift, getting more people on the buses, a lot more money, and less bus journeys. That's what the figures show to me.
Well, I think you'd be wrong in looking at the stats. And I mean, we're talking about 2.4 million people. If you think about Scotland's population, 2.4 million people travelling on the concessionary charge, using concessionary fares is significant. I think your point about can it do more than one thing and can it drive change? And I think the problem we've got with the concessionary charging scheme is it's set out in statute. You've seen amendments in relation to the expansion to under 22s, but it's a right and it's set out in statute. There then has to be a negotiation in relation to the amount that is required per journey and to ensure that we're getting the value for money for the price of those 2.4 million, which is a considerable number of people accessing and using bus charging. Does it allow us to use £500 million worth of public spend to then direct other aspect of transport policy? It doesn't, because I think it's hemmed in by the original legislation good intent and successful as it has been. So therefore, if you want to use it more strategically, that would be open up to a new government, a new parliament, determining how they might want to use that value of the £500 million. But I do strongly believe that the concessionary fare scheme is extremely popular. People like it, people use it, increasingly use it. 2.4 million people is a significant number of people using that scheme. But I think your point is, can it be used in a more strategic way? I think that's the challenge. I think it's the challenge of the underpinning legislation.
So you must have thought about the answer to that. What is the more strategic way, Cabinet
So
Secretary?
the Fairest Fare Review looked at that, and I know you took an interest in this. And that's something that can be. Is there a way of trying to be able to be a bit more strategic in our partnership and delivery with bus authorities using that funding? Or do we use the 2019 Transport Act 2019, which obviously you've been monitoring very closely, in order to try and get change? And obviously franchising, bus partnership and ownership are different tools that can be used. But I think it was Mr Matheson that raised this point previously in committee. I'm not saying that I've got if I'd had an answer to this immediately, I would have been doing this as part of my responsibilities. But there are a number of things that we've been having to deal with in the transport space, in lots of different areas, and in relation to the concessionary scheme, actually rolling out the under-22s as part of that has been a major piece of what we've been doing. Okay.
I'll just move on to the next question, which is from... sorry, Mark, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about whether you think that we're getting the most value out of that investment, because it is an investment in young people, but thinking about modal shift, I mean, could we not be using the concessionary travel schemes to really encourage modal shift? Should the government not be leading on areas like, workplace travel planning, about car use reduction for whole families, and using the availability of concessionary travel schemes for families as a way to help to drive that? Because it feels like it sits in isolation, and that's great what it's achieving, but I could see it being so much more powerful if it was linked to the other agendas that are in the climate change plan, for example.
So again, that's working with the private sector. You're working with businesses, encouraging them to have, and they are required to have their work travel plans, and how you can work with them in order to try and get more people to use public transport and coming into work, and that can happen for rail and for bus. Do we try and encourage family use? Yes, we do on rail in particular. If you look at kind of the younger people, and in terms of families and the offers that are there, in Kids for a Quid, and also other offers that are there on rail. Certainly in terms of the peak fares removal, we worked with Chambers of Commerce, we worked with businesses, encouraging people. They wanted more people to come into their workplace, people encouraging more people to actually be present. And that part of that is obviously their promotion themselves of that. So that engagement, I encourage Transport Scotland to ensure that they were, and ScotRail to be involved in that. Sestrans are doing some interesting work in terms of where routes are required, and that's part of what I think was referred to previously by Sarah Boyack, but looking as to where people need to move to and how, and again working with major employers on that. Health is a big player in this, because a lot of people that are transporting are either travelling to hospitals as major employment anchors, and also in terms of patients, and trying to align all that together is really important. And the transport to health work that's going on, I think, is a really important part of that strategic who needs to go where and how. That also covers aviation. We've been talking to Western Isles about that as well. So I think this how transport can be used strategically is really important. I'm not sure concessionary travel within that, and how do you, unless you were to expand it, which I think some people may want to do, but then that adds to the bill that we've just been talking about, whether you're actually then using that strategically.
I mean, there's a collection of, pilot projects, approaches there that's kind of happening in some areas. I'm not getting a sense that, because this is a big amount of money to invest. It's a big amount of money. I see the benefit of what it's delivering for young people, but I don't see it necessarily, building into that, need for modal shift and the kind of choices that families are making. And I just feel that the government could do more to market it, more to link it in to, workplace, like colleges and universities, for example, other workplaces where there's a need to tackle, car usage, the need to get that modal shift. And I'm not seeing this as a centrepiece of government's programme to really drive that modal shift, which, the government has set an ambitious target, 20% reduction in vehicle mileage, walked back from that, but at the same time, we've got 450 million going into concessionary travel, and I'm not seeing the kind of strategic kind of foundation for that.
Well, okay, so there's 2.4 million people using it. I think what you're trying to do is how do you encourage the working age population to travel more on bus, and is an incentive to do that, to travel with their children at weekends and evenings. We know that bus use is going up weekends and also evenings, and the leisure market is really improving. Can employers and are employers doing things to ensure that there's more bus patronage use? I know, for example, the University of St Andrews has a very good bus plan that they work with. So these are happening. The issue is do we make it a top-down government requirement that we go and visit every single employer to say, why aren't you encouraging your working age population to use the concessionary travel with their elderly relatives or their children more? I think that becomes more problematic. But Alison, do you want to come in? You might be able to help, maybe cross purposes.
So I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things specifically in relation to the amount of money that we spend investing in the bus sector, right? So what the concessionary travel scheme does, as you know, is it provides a benefit to the user, right? But that's only good enough if there is a service there for them to use, right? So I think the concessionary scheme is part of the mix of the different aspects that funding is provided that supports the bus sector. Could we use that totality in a more effective way? I'd be more than happy to kind of have a more kind of detailed discussion on the range of options that exist as the Cabinet Secretaries set out. But the things that drive or that encourage people to use bus are also that are about service availability, they're about reliability, which relates to the types of things that you get associated with bus priority. So for me, what we are doing and what we should be doing is bringing that back into that kind of overall collective and just thinking about how best that investment can be done. And that is what the monitoring and valuation work that we have underway will help give us the key signals and the steers as to what we should be doing.
Okay, I'm going to move to the Deputy Convener very briefly, please.
It's actually just picking up on the point that Alison Irvine has made there. So we're spending the best part of £1 billion a year in concessionary travel, but we've got an increasing number of communities that actually don't have access to public transport because of a reduction in bus services, which creates this issue of transport inequality, which for some communities is real and is becoming increasingly problematic. So do you think there is the balance between the investment we put into concessionary travel and the increasing challenge we have of transport inequality for communities, that we've got that balance right and that the budget reflects that balance as being right?
So I think that's probably for politicians to make an assessment of, and this committee actually as well. I think it's £525 million. It's not almost our best part of £1 billion. It's at £525 million, substantial amount of public funding. Does it? Could it work harder? I think yes, it could. It would need primary legislation changes and an act of this Parliament to do that and to use the different levers that were talked about. But you can see it from monitoring. I mean, I know in my own area, West Lothian, it's got one of the lowest uptakes of under 22s because the bus services. It goes an awful lot east-west, it doesn't go north-south, and a lot of these are historic routes, etc. So as Alison Irvine set out, the availability of buses is absolutely critical, and that's why local authorities can and are pursuing, and you've seen even in recent weeks Highland Council taking over routes that were previously run, but obviously in a deregulated market, you've got the private companies will be operating in terms that obviously give them a return on that. So therefore, that shift in the support in the budget for regional, for local transport authorities, the regional transport partnerships to pursue franchising, for example, which Strathclyde Passenger Transport is the one that is pursuing that just now, with a view to be more strategic across the regional transport partnership as what can be done, and different places are pursuing different aspects of it. But could that funding be working harder? My view is yes. I think it'll be a challenge for the next Parliament to determine how that can happen.
Kevin, you want to come in very briefly?
Very briefly, in terms of creating better bus services, and the concessionary fare scheme is scrutinised to the nth degree, you now are looking at the pilot of fare cap in the Highlands and Islands. But one of the things that comes across all of the time is around about the reliability issues. So, Cabinet Secretary, would it be worthwhile actually looking at a pilot and picking an area to look at bus priority measures to see what can be done about reliability and to see if that creates the modal shift that we all want to see?
I think the member makes a very important point, which is why we're investing £60 million in the budget in the Bus Infrastructure Fund, because reliability will make a huge difference on bus usage. Clearly, I mean, I recall one of the real challenges in the Lothians where reliability of buses were disrupted by the extensive roadworks required for trams. So therefore, by the time that buses got out to West Lothian, they couldn't stick to timetable because they were being held up in different parts. So having smooth and uninterrupted routes for buses will, and the technology that many of them are using, real-time technology, using data and digital in a very effective way, can mean that people know when the bus is going to turn up, notwithstanding in all weathers. I would say the Bus Infrastructure Fund can also be used and is being used to make it more comfortable for people in certain areas if they're having to wait for a bus as well. That's been used in some more rural areas. But you're absolutely... So I think there's something about those areas where they've got the improvements on the bus infrastructure, being able to monitor what can be done. Whether you tie that with a fare issue or not is open to question, but clearly in terms of what we've achieved in the budget, what the requirements were of transport to deliver for the budget, and the negotiations that took place last year, there was a bus fare pilot requests were put in to see which RTPs would want to take part in it. I do think there'll be something around the reliability tied to the Bus Infrastructure Fund.
So the point that I'm trying to get at is a comprehensive pilot in one area might make the odds here, because what we've seen in certain places is piecemeal things which are unpopular with the public, like, for example, Aberdeen bus gates, rather than priority measures right across the city. So do you think it would be worthwhile to prove to the public that this works, to have a pilot in one specific area which could show that priorities actually work for all?
So I think it will be interesting to see, for example, what Inverness do in some of the towns, particularly in the Highlands, and how they use the combination of all the different tools that are available to them. It's not our job to do the RTP's job for them. The regional transport partnerships can do that and do that well themselves. I think Dundee have got some very interesting propositions in terms of Bus Infrastructure Fund deployment. They've been waiting to do that, and that reliability will help the market more generally. Do you need to tie it into a bus pilot? I think it will prove itself regardless of a bus pilot fare cap. So they're not mutually exclusive, if that makes sense. They can be either seen together, hypothetically in the future, or they can be seen separately. But I think the Bus Infrastructure Fund will make a significant difference to reliability and people's capability of using the buses. Thereafter, we'll determine whether does it need something else on top of that for able to do it in reducing fares. That's all public funding. That all requires extensive public funding, and some of the fare pilots could be as much as, I don't know, 50, £100 million or more in terms of what you're requiring, and bearing in mind what we've just been discussing. If you're trying to be strategic, And you've also got other tools in your, to use in regional transport partnerships. They need to identify which is the one that's most applicable for them as well as identify if there's anything in their budget or indeed the Scottish budget, and then that requires additional funding at some point in the future, but it's not in this budget as we speak.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah, over to you.
Thanks. I want to ask about the flat fare bus pilot. The budget documents say that it's going to be a cost of £7 million, but the press release announcing it said that it would cost £10 million. Which is the correct figure, and why is there a discrepancy between the two?
Both and. One is in this financial year and one is in next financial year. So there's £3 million for this financial year for the 4-month period, and then there's £7 million in the next financial year, and that gives a 12-month pilot of £10 million.
Okay, that's very helpful. 3 million and then 7 million. Can you explain how the scheme will operate, particularly how the operator reimbursement is going to be calculated?
So the operator reimbursement in all of this, including in the concessionary fare, is one of the most challenging aspects. I'm not the lead on bus, as you're probably aware, but Alison, would you maybe want to help in terms of the reimbursement rates? Part of that is why. And it's quite a complex thing to do because you're having to identify, how you work with different operators, and also some of the challenges will be on the cross-boundary aspects when there's different fares and different systems between different council areas. So that's why it's taken some time to work through.
I think the only thing I would add to that in terms of the reimbursement from the operators, that's obviously something that's key for us in order to demonstrate, that the money has been allocated appropriately, that we are also working with all of the operators, particularly in the Highland area, around the type of ticketing machines that they have, just to ensure that the systems are set up in such a way that the data can be provided to us. And one of the reasons why we were able to start in Shetland is because of the relative simplicity of the bus travel movements in that area.
So would that be on individual buses, having a smart system when you pay?
Effectively, you get on the bus, you tell the driver where you want to go, they press a button, you get charged the £2, but the button records the actual fare, and that information then has to come back to us.
And can you say what assessment you've made of the resilience of services people can actually use? That's been mentioned a couple of times about having a bus to use your free bus pass on, but it's also an issue in terms of the £2 cap.
Again, in terms of the resilience of the service, because this is a pilot, what this gives us the opportunity to see where this type of intervention works, what type of impact that it has. So again, picking the Highland area, you've got a really broad cross-section of travel trip journeys. So around the main urban areas, we'll see what you would typically expect for short bus journeys. Does it have a bigger impact there? What impact does it have on the longer distance trips? Those are the things that we want to learn as part of the pilot work that we're undertaking.
And what work are you doing to actually promote it to people, not just the bus companies, so that they are aware of the pilot being available to actually encourage people to get onto the bus? Because it links back to the discussion we had in the previous session about encouraging people not to use cars.
So clearly we're doing it in a phased way, starting in Shetland. There's been a lot of publicity, particularly there, and then obviously as it's rolled out in different, you obviously want to roll it out when it's available in the different local areas, and that's obviously will be done in conjunction with the Regional Transport Partnership, HyTrans, specifically there, and also the bus companies will want to promote it themselves. And I think your point about reliability or resilience, I suppose it's more, the resilience aspect. Ideally what we'd like this to prove, but we don't know until we've obviously monitored it. Does it encourage more people who haven't been using buses to use buses, and therefore increase the patronage, and therefore provide that a more resilience to what might be more marginal operating areas, particularly in rural and more rural areas in particular.
That was one of the findings of the cross-party group in sustainable transport, that resilience and accessibility were absolutely critical for people to rely on them. Okay, thank you very much, Convener.
Move on to Douglas now. I'm just saying, and I know Mark said to me the clock doesn't ever stop. I agree it doesn't ever stop, but I'm running out of time. So any help with short questions, short answers makes my life easier, please. And it means everyone gets in. Douglas.
I'll try my best, Convener. Moving on to rail now, Cabinet Secretary. Can you clarify how much the subsidy is for ScotRail and Caledonian Sleeper in the upcoming budget?
Right, so it's in the budget lines. It will be done as a total. But let's try to think. I'll ask my colleagues if you've got this. It'll be level 4. It'll be down as level 4. And which one's that? Rail services. So it's down as rail services, and I'm trying to sort of use my glasses. I should probably do my glasses on this. Is it page 30 in this one? Just bear with me. Because you've got rail services, and it'll be within the rail services aspects. I don't have. Oh, it's yeah. I mean, on the level 2, which you have, right? So, the level 2 you have, it's in terms of the 26-27 budget. That's 1 billion and 8. You know, it's 1 billion 8.6 million. That's what you've got in your
And if I look back to previous budgets, if I go back a decade to 16 and 17, if I'm looking at it correctly, I'm seeing a figure for franchise services at that time of about 266 million. So am I right in thinking that our subsidy to run what is effectively ScotRail and Caledonian Sleeper has almost quadrupled in the last decade? Or am I getting that figures wrong, Cabinet Secretary?
Well, there's a whole load of different things. I mean, I don't have your figures from 10 years ago, but anybody would know in terms of the relation of increase in costs. I can give you one reference. Between January 2022 and January 2025, the CPI inflation index rose by 17.8%, and that's ONS statistics. So therefore, to give you a comparator, and this is not 10 years ago, this is only, and I think everybody understands what's happened with inflation and some of the cost increases, particularly even in the last 3-4 years. The 2022-23 subsidy was £694.8 million and adjusted therefore becomes £818 million. And therefore, in terms of looking about what increased spend we have, there'll be increased spend because we are actually improving services, and also in terms of our work on, whether it's on peak fares, etc. We manage, obviously, looking at what the patronage is, and we have obviously got to have the efficiencies within that as well. But don't underestimate. I mean, basic look at inflation, we'll see increases. I don't know and recognise your costs because I haven't looked at those costs in particular. But if you're trying to make an argument that somehow, the previous franchising was superior because it was cheaper, then I think there's also the point about what people's experience has been and the reliability and functionality that was involved in there. And obviously the circumstances in which the franchise came to an end is something that you might want to reflect on as well, let alone what doesn't account for in public funding would have been the deficit and indeed the losses that were made by different franchise companies. So there's, never mind inflation, there's a whole variety of different costs involved when you look at rail services funding. Sorry, that wasn't a short answer.
Yeah. No. And Cabinet Secretary, I get inflation puts prices up, puts costs up for everyone. But if I'm looking back and I'm looking at the figures correctly, then it's it's 400% increase. So what? And you've mentioned improvements to services. What would you say was the key service improvements over the last decade in our railways?
So if you look at the patronage, journeys in financial year 24-25 were £84.7 million, and that is 84.7 million passengers, up from 63.7 million in 22-23. So that is a 33% increase in numbers of passengers over 2 years, and that's a good and healthy increase. We have electrified different lines. We've opened up the Leavenmouth line, so you're getting more people that are travelling on that line. I mean, we heard talk earlier on about the Borders Railway, which some people didn't want us to deliver, but was delivered. And clearly that provided additional patronage in terms of more rail services. So the border, obviously we then have provided more services on that line. In my own constituency, the Bathgate Airdrie line has been opened. Again, that provides more services for passengers to go on those lines. So clearly in terms of the provision of services, and bearing in mind rail has to be subsidised, the costs are considerable in terms of the investment from the public sector into rail. But those lines themselves have demonstrated that we've got improvements in terms of the availability of rail services that have happened under this government.
If passenger numbers are going up, why does that not reduce subsidies? And, you know, if we have more and more people using the railway, which would be a good thing, does that mean our subsidy is going to go up? Surely I thought, you know, more people, more paying passengers would actually reduce that subsidy required for ScotRail and Caledonia Sleeper.
But we're also holding down rail increases, and of course we did that and over a period of time, and also in terms of the peak rail fares, we've removed that, so that requires subsidy. We also want to see more staff on our trains, and we know that public safety and presence of staff is really important. We need more drivers. They cost more money as well. The more drivers we have, the more reliable our services can be, because you're not having cancellations because of shortage of drivers. So we're now seeing record levels of recruitment of drivers, which improves the services. And also in terms of, we don't have driver-only trains like they have down in England, and so therefore, you know, part of that is the visibility of our rail staff, and that means that we have services.
So we've got to have shorter answers, Cabinet Secretary. I understand you want to get things in, but you know, I'm happy to stay here till 2 o'clock if you want to. Other committee members may not. But we've got to have shorter answers and shorter questions.
I was answering what was a very broad question over 10 years, which I thought I was trying to answer.
Cabinet Secretary, I'll move on to my last part, and that is, obviously there was 200 million rail investment promised to the North East of Scotland to reduce journey times by 20 minutes between Aberdeen and the Central Belt. That was meant to have taken place by 2026. We're at the end of that period now. So is that project dead in the water, or can people in Aberdeen expect to see journey times reduce by 20 minutes in the near future?
So, for brevity, Douglas Simpson has asked this question several times in the Aberdeen Committee, and I'll probably refer to the official report of my previous answers on this question.
You could give a bit more fulsome answer than that. No, in fairness, Cabinet Secretary, I think that's slightly disrespectful, would be my view as convener. Whether you choose to follow my views completely differently. So could you just answer
it has been asked
briefly?
before. We are investing, we are improving, particularly in Montrose, Arbroath, and also at the stations in Dundee and Aberdeen. So there is improvement, and improvement works taking place on rail, and investment taking place on rail. In terms of what we have said about that, I think it was probably about 18 months ago I explained the changes at that point. I'm happy to write to the member again to reiterate what we are doing and what we are investing, but we continue to invest in the North East Rail. What the industry has said to us would be the best way of tackling this is to have a planned, systematic investment that allows the best use of resources, the least disruption on that. And I get contacts from other MSPs in the area concerned about the disruption that will take place when these improvements, whether it's on the rail track, on signalling and different areas that have improved journey times to date. But in terms of some of those aspects were agreed as part of the rail improvements with Aberdeen and the region in terms of the regional deal alongside that in terms of improvements. So there are improvements taking place, there is investment taking place, They're in specific locations, and I'm happy to write to the member after this to give more detail as to where those investments are. But the overall issue about what was going to be done when was addressed some time ago in this committee, and I'm happy to refer both to that official report and to provide additional information if that's what the committee and the member requires. Convener.
Secretary, move to the Deputy Convener. Michael.
You've given a commitment to complete the dualling of the A9 by 2035, and you mentioned that in your opening statement. What are the principal risks that you might face to achieving that target date?
So we set out in the statement I gave to Parliament last week the ordering that we will now commence with. The initial ordering has been consistent in the first 5 sections, but what will be happening thereafter, I'm going to bring Lawrence in, particularly around some of the risk aspects of it, but we wanted to provide certainty, and that's why the budget, both the budget and indeed the spending review and commitments going forward from the government has identified the funding certainty that is required in order to deliver the area. In fact, I'm going to open the site, the compound site, for the next stage that is going to be having active work, which is the Tay Crossing Ballinanuig. Obviously, in terms of the risk elements, the type of contract that we're now using, the new model contract, puts more of the risk on government if for unforeseen circumstances, and that's part of that new engineering contract in terms of what we're using. So the external factor risks that could exist in any construction contract, more of that lies with us. But if you don't mind, I'll bring in Lawrence Sherman for that.
Yeah, there's a number of risks really, ranging from the weather. If that's bad over the next 10 years, obviously that may have an impact. Cabinet Secretary has mentioned about external factors, inflation affecting tendering prices and things like that. Also, contractor appetite for the work. We're putting forward a framework agreement, or in the initial stages of that, to safeguard contractors for the remaining contracts through to 2035, and we need to speak to them, make sure that we've got the right set of conditions through the new engineering contract that we're using, to make sure that we can get interest in the tendering opportunities that will exist over the next few years. So those are the main risks. There's also a risk around the remaining section, which hasn't got the statutory process complete at the moment. So obviously we need to take that forward around the Dunkeld section and bottom that out in due course.
Okay, so quite a stack of risk, not all of which is in your control either, as well. You mentioned the framework agreement as well. You may have heard my exchange earlier on the issue of capital investment programmes as an economic multiplier and trying to maximise local supply chain opportunities. Can you tell me what you're doing in the A9 specifically through your framework agreements and any tendering exercise to ensure that we maximise the local supply chain opportunities for Scottish-based businesses?
So all of the contracts we have, and the existing ones, let alone the ones for the framework agreement, have a raft of community benefits clauses in them, which encourage or entice the contractor to invest in the local communities and make sure that they take on board local labour, unemployed people in the local vicinity as well throughout the construction process and the site setup, etc. They also have to advertise all of their subcontracting opportunities on the Scottish procurement website to make sure that adverts are out there for local opportunities to get buy-in from local companies and suppliers as much as possible. Also, obviously, there'll be a great emphasis on the workforce being located up and down the A9, so there'll be a lot of generated income for Scotland in that respect because of the location of the workforce right up and down the A9. So I think the key thing is the community benefits and making sure that as much emphasis is placed on that with the contractor, and contractors are very up to speed on that. That's been part of the equation for quite some time with all of our sorts of contracts over a number of years to encourage people to invest in the local communities in a number of ways which I won't go into detail.
Maybe you could provide us with a bit more of that detail, because of the £3 billion that you're likely to invest in the A9, how much of that do you expect to stay in the Scottish economy?
That's very difficult to say. I couldn't answer that off the top of my head.
What would your expectation be?
I can't answer that question.
Do you have a target?
I'd have to go back to other projects in the past to see what they might have, the split might have been in terms of local and foreign investment.
Do you have a target?
Don't have a target at the moment, no.
Should you have a target? And if not, why not?
It's a reasonable question.
So I would just add that we have to operate within the procurement and subsidy control legislation as well. I'm sure you'll have heard quite a lot about that in kind of other guises. So the work that Lawrence has described that we do is as much as we think that is legally able to push that type of thing. And under the current legislation, I don't think it would be appropriate for us to have a target for the amount of investment in that. But one of the things around the procurement route that we're now going to is that the type and the size of contract is more likely to be attractive to the UK-based construction sector. So that, I think, would help in terms of answering the questions that you've put to us.
I thought you just increased the social aspects of ScotZeb by doubling it. So you've got a clear social benefit target from the present ScotZeb round. Is that right?
Yeah, so that's within the scoring of that particular round. Yeah. Which is grant funding as opposed to procurement, but we're all kind of operating under the similar guises here. What Lawrence and the team do when they are setting up the kind of the procurement sort of variables that they are looking for to ensure that we get best value is look at the totality of the scoring matrix in the round and make sure that that is aligned as much as possible with government objectives.
Okay, it'd be interesting to know what further work you are doing in this space, because I think if we're investing, it's the biggest infrastructure project in Scotland at the present time. If we don't maximise local economic benefit from that, then I think that would be, frankly, shameful, given that capital investment like this is a huge economic multiplier. And it'd be good to get some figures around how we are maximising local content in these projects.
Convener, we've already written to the committee about this in relation to the A9 already, in relation to the Tomatin to Moy, in terms of the impact there, particularly on local firms that are being used, and also in terms of apprentices, and also in terms of local labour and skills, etc. So we can give you, obviously that's the first one of the latest section, so we can give you again the information on that aspect. But again, in terms of the Scottish Government's from the overall procurement side of things, the legislation goes back to 2014 in relation to bringing in that aspects of community benefit, but it's highly competitive. That's why obviously from tendering to make sure we get best value in relation to the tenders that are produced. The framework agreement is a new set of what we're providing, and the form of funding that we're using in terms of capitally funded will ensure there are more Scottish and also potentially wider UK firms that will be benefiting from the A9 aspects.
Okay. You've ruled out the use of the mutual investment model for the A9. Is the MIM being ruled out for any other transport projects like, I don't know, A83, A82?
So I would refer you, if you look at if you read the infrastructure investment strategy that the Cabinet Secretary of Finance produced, clearly there'll be a number of different routes of funding that will be used for all major infrastructure aspects, and including, for example, the bonds aspects that the First Minister launched in terms of Scottish Government bonds. So until we just determine the correct procurement route for each and every one of our transport projects, it would be premature to say what would be used for which, apart from those that have been determined to date. But clearly, in terms of the business cases that have to be put forward, and also the value for money aspect, we'd consider a mutual investment model. And quite clearly, we are open to using private funding. We have done. There's a line of £147 million in the budget for next year, which is about funding what has been privately funded. So it's got to be appropriate. But the mutual investment model was costing 16% more when initially determined. Now, that's a risk for government to say, actually, in terms of availability of capital, is that something you could do? It increased to 28%. And that's one of the reasons why, or the main reason in terms of value for money, that we took not to use that for that particular route. But it doesn't mean that at some point in the future, future governments will use mutual investment model across a number of infrastructure propositions, and that's what the Cabinet Secretary for Finance set out in the accompanying documents to the budget.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Michael. Mark, I think you've got some questions now.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to get some clarity as to what was spent specifically on active travel last year. I think the draft budget indicated 159.8 million. Was that a reduction from the previous year?
In terms of active travel, I'm looking at the sustainable. I'm just trying to look at what figures you
specific active travel component of that, which I'm interested in, Cabinet Secretary, because that budget line has incorporated other things in recent years. So I'm trying to isolate what was spent last year and whether that was an increase or not.
Have you got that to hand, to what figures you're using? Is that the same table I've got? Yeah, it's the same. So if you're looking at the sustainable and active, support for active and sustainable travel, the outturn 24-25 was 122.7 million. In 25-26, it was 135.9 million. And for this coming year, it's up to £226 million. Now, it's what, and in addition to that, you've got low carbon projects. So in terms of, I would say that there's an increase in there which would include bus infrastructure. And I had discussions with the committee before about how we've combined those, actually because some of the projects would make sense for local authorities to bid for, and in terms of plan for integrated active travel and bus routes. So looking forward, we've got some funding of that, particularly is going to be on EV aspects, and we understand that. But the active travel has been fairly, where we have tried to spend as much as we can when we can. The biggest frustration has been not being able to pursue things during the year, and it's been sometimes late in terms of providing the funding through the door. But I think, is there anything else on active travel in terms of the comparison? Because I feel reasonably comfortable that we are doing what we're spending, that there's not somehow been anything reduced from it. I think the biggest challenge has been being able to plan for multi-year and also release of funding mid-year.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the transparency around that, though, because, you know, again, you're talking about the Bus Infrastructure Fund, but where I'm asking specifically about active travel and the infrastructure projects. So are you saying you can't disaggregate the spend on that, because it should be fairly easy to
we will with final allocations,
and
a lot of, and of course, you know, with active travel, a lot of it is now moved over. I think it was Patrick Harvey that kind of led that change in how it was being funded in the Tier 1 and Tier 2, particularly for local government. Now, why does that mean? It means the local government have got, who are closer to the projects, are able to determine, rather than use Sustrans as we did previously, be able to determine what is required locally. So a great deal of that is on the Tier 1 and the Tier 2 in terms of the spend on that, which is back down to probably level 4, which is the table that I will not be able to look at, particularly without my glasses on.
an increase in active travel for the coming year or not?
Well, we've certainly been maintaining our active travel in terms of our allocation, how that's distributed. That we're still to finalise how we're distributing that line of funding. And in terms of the plans that are, we've obviously got a lot of plans ahead. Local authorities have a lot of plans ahead for the Tier 1 and Tier 2. But I'm happy to come back to you to give you a certainty that the active travel element of that overall budget line is continuing in a good and positive way. Sorry, you want to come in, Catherine, have you identified the line?
Yeah, just on 25-26, the autumn budget numbers or even the return, what you're not seeing there is in 25-26 there was a separate line for the cycling, walk and safer route funding in the central government. That programme has now stopped and that funding is now within the active travel line for 26-27. So it is fairly flat across the 2 years, with the difference then being the bus infrastructure funding.
Okay, thanks for that. And in terms of the bus infrastructure fund then, I mean, you're confirming that that is 60 million. I think CPT were on social media saying it was 60 million recently, but that's actually confirmed, that's within that wider budget line, that it will be 60 million?
Yeah,
right.
I've said that.
Okay. Is that enough for the whole of Scotland?
Well, is it ever enough? I think there's a bit about on all these areas. You could spend more, but I think part of it is the planning aspect and the delivery of it, and obviously in terms of the disruption, in terms of the spend, as it's being rolled out, there's obviously challenges to make sure that you're running a system. Local authorities or transport authorities are running their system. So I think that is fairly ambitious in terms of spend for delivery aspects. But obviously, once it's delivered, it's a capital spend that allows then the improvements to be experienced by passengers. So therefore, it's increment. Every time you're building a new lane or whatever, then it's the next, etc. So I think that's a big boost. I think it's been welcomed by both local authorities, regional transport partnerships, and the bus industry themselves. This is what they really want to help that reliability that everybody's talking about.
So just go back to Alison Irvin's point from earlier on. You were talking about the need to sort of balance investment in bus from concessionary travel to investing in the infrastructure and the passenger experience and the reliability and services. I'm just thinking about, how government makes these choices, because you could look at, say, the policy of dualling the A96, and you could say, well, actually, if the government switched its policy to dualling, key sections of the A96, that would make a saving over a number of years, which could be invested in capital infrastructure around bus for the whole of Scotland and for the A96 corridor. So, there are choices that government can make, and I'm trying to get a sense of where bus sits within this. And if 60 million, might be enough for this year, but if we're looking at a transformation of bus services, surely what's needed is substantially more than that if we're to get the most out of modal shift and investment in public transport and the changes needed.
So in terms of what we need to do for active and sustainable travel and bus infrastructure and bus support going forward as part of our last discussion on climate change, the trajectory of that will need to continue, yes, for this comprehensive spending review, yes, for this carbon budget, but thereafter and onward going. But, I think it's potentially, it's a choice people can make, politicians can make, as to whether they think it's important to have the Nairn bypass or whether they think it's more important to have the bus infrastructure fund and use that to play off it against each other. That's not an approach that we're taking. We think we have to do both and.
Point that was being made there was that key section. So I think the government had recently suggested that the policy would be to dual key sections such as the Nairn bypass, but it would stop short of full dualling.
Correct, that's not what we said, and I'll be answering a GIQ later on today that will help clarify
that. Mark, I'm sorry, we are so short of time. You pushed the envelope quite a lot on that. Sarah, over to you.
Thanks, Convener. Just a single question here. A recent Transport Scotland press release highlighted the broad scope of the 85 million low-carbon programmes budget line. Could you give us a more detailed breakdown of the budget, particularly at the amount being invested to support public EV charging, installation and incentives to support EV uptake? We discussed that in the last session with the CabSec, but could we get a breakdown right across that sector?
So some of that we're still determining, but the EV side of things, we can write to you about it. But for one example, there's 10 million of that's going to be for rural and islands infrastructure for EV. But if that's convenient, I'm getting a signal from the convener that I should come back to you.
And I'm trying to help. If we could get that in writing, I think that would be useful for the member and for the committee. So maybe one of your officials could make that happen, Cabinet Secretary. Thank you very much. Now we come back to Mark for another very straightforward question.
Is there money in the budget for the purchase and upgrade of Ardrossan Harbour?
Yes, and obviously the purchase we would want to see and expect to see completed this financial year. So the funding for that is this financial year, and thereafter there is funding in our ports and harbours ongoing. There'll be on purchase. There'll be immediate work that CMA will want to do from their provision of ferries, and then for ports infrastructure, and thereafter in future years there'll be provision.
Thank you. Just to clarify, Cabinet Secretary, previously in the past you've made various announcements on Ardrossan Harbour. I think the word you used, imminently, that was about 3.5, 4 months ago. Could you define imminently? Is it going to happen in the next month, 2 months, 3 months? What's going on?
I'm keen to use this year's financial provision to secure the purchase. It is a complex negotiations. The heads of terms have been agreed. The detail of that has to be worked through. Some of it goes back to 19th century. There's not actually been transfer of property for some time. So therefore, there's a lot to that. We want to have as clear a title as possible. So bear with us. I know there's a lot of interest in this, and I'll inform Parliament at the earliest and most appropriate opportunity.
Of course, sometimes if it's not been sold, sorry, I speak as a surveyor now, if the property's not been sold for a long period of time, it's much easier because there's a consolidated title which hasn't been changed. So I think we're all looking for an immediate answer. Alison, you'll tell me I'm wrong.
I think, as the Cabinet Secretary has already said, this is a complex deal that needs to be worked through, and I am under no illusion about how important this is to the Cabinet Secretary.
Okay,
and I welcome your comments as a surveyor.
That's probably as far as we're going to get on that. Douglas, I think you've got a couple of questions.
Yeah. Cabinet Secretary, can you provide any more detail on the proposed air departure tax?
That's been led by the Cabinet Secretary for Finance, and what we can tell you is that we would the transfer of powers is now being consulted on, so I'd encourage everybody to be involved in that from 2027, but for the first year it will reflect what the UK's air departure passenger duty levels are. So for that first year there won't be, but we have intention to introduce something in relation to private jet, but that would probably be best in terms of that aspect. It's being led by the Exchequer.
It's going to be pegged, well, basically this
first year. Yeah.
First year is going to be, people going on holiday are going to be no worse off, but after that there's no decision being taken.
So obviously the consultation, I've heard from different people that there's opportunities there, and we want to make sure that we do the right thing by the people of Scotland, do the right thing by our passengers, and also understand the airline market itself.
So in advance of that consultation, have you done any modelling work to see what the impact would be on our tourism sector if the costs to travellers coming to Scotland was put up?
So we will be pegging our levels to the UK government. In terms of the transfer of powers, it was something that on a cross-party basis was agreed in relation to changes to the Scotland Act to provide us with those provisions. But in terms of, you're making assumptions that have not been made. So therefore, if you have views, I would encourage people to take part in the consultation that's currently taking part.
Okay. And finally, this change has been done for the proposals for a private jet tax. How much do you expect that to take in to the budget for when it's introduced?
As I said, this policy has been led by the Cabinet Secretary for Finance in relation to the Exchequer as a taxation measure, and I will ask her to provide information to the committee if that's been produced.
Okay, so you've got no information on that.
I'm not a lead in this, and it's been led by Cabinet Secretary for Finance.
I think it would be helpful, Cabinet Secretary, to get some feedback on that so that the committee have it. So I'd be grateful.
It will be available. I'm just saying I don't have it because it's not been my lead. So.
Okay. Right. Next question is Bob Doris.
Thanks, Convener. Cabinet Secretary, the taxonomy section of the budget at the very end under next step says the Scottish Government has launched a net zero assessment of the new and significant expenditure which will be mainstreamed in early 2026. The committee would be interested to know how those net zero assessments work in practice, and what would be helpful if you were able to maybe give us an example of the decision-making process that leads to specific budget decisions that are embedded within the draft budget before us.
So I might bring Catherine in addition, because I think this is probably most appropriately probably for Gillian Martin when she comes in to give evidence next week on the climate change plan. It's for early stage and new projects, so it will be at the start of projects as opposed to my understanding in terms of continuing projects. So it will be for new policies that are coming forward. I don't know, Catherine, if you've got anything additional on that one.
Nothing further to add.
A very brief follow-up question, again, just for consideration, rather than maybe answering just now. Clearly, the Cabinet Secretary for Transport will have a lot of budget priorities that you want to see. You mentioned much of those today, much of it linked to net zero. There's still difficult decisions have to be made when we've got another Cabinet Secretary in charge of the net zero aspect of everything. What's the interaction between those two portfolios when coming to those decisions?
So we have a responsibility ourselves to deliver in terms of what we set forward in terms of the climate change plan, and obviously the considerations of how we drive forward net zero. I mean, I would say that net zero is, in terms of carbon emission reduction, is right across all of our policy areas in terms of choices. So we have to coordinate, and I think some of the points that were being made earlier about housing and energy and EV charging and other areas shows you why there has to be alignment across government in a lot of these areas. But we take our responsibilities very seriously, and to make sure that we deliver on the carbon reductions that we are statutorily responsible for.
I think, I won't go back. I think it's an emerging area of scrutiny for committees going forward to understand those decisions governments are making and how they're made through that prism. So thank you.
Indeed.
Thanks, Bob. Sue Webber, do you have any questions?
A very short question, Cabinet Secretary. It's around the bus pilot and the indication that you've chosen the £2 flat fare and how that was set. Everyone aspires to have a bus service as good as we have and fortunate enough to have in the capital. And they've obviously got increasing passenger numbers, but only over the weekend they've announced an increase in their price cap or single fare to £2.40. So the £2, I'm trying to figure out how we manage the public's expectation about how viable a £2 fare cap may be. Oh, no, it's a pilot project, but we still need to imagine how that might all pan out, should it be successful, and what's actually viable when it comes to running a bus service.
So I think it's an important point, and that's why the viability, and would £2 be enough to deliver what's required? And in some parts of the rest of the UK, for example, it's £3. I think I'll be upfront, that was part of negotiations in the budget, and it was the requirement of the government was that we looked at £2 bus fare cap. I think that's issue potentially very marginal in terms of whether it works or not. And part of the lessons from that would be, well, actually, is £2 too, is it too low? Or is it so low enough that it does create the increased patronage? And that's exactly the sort of things that we need to be considering as part of that pilot.
Thank you, Kevin. That's fine. I said it was short.
Thank you. And we like short answers or short questions and short answers. We seem to have caught up from where we hope to be. So thank you, Cabinet Secretary and committee members. And what we're now going to do is go into private session to consider the evidence that we've heard before we get the Cabinet Secretary for Net Zero to come in and talk to SI. So we'll move into private session. Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary, and thank you to your officials for their input.